The next part I'll be talking about will be the brush shape. So this two setting for me is really important when I was sketching to kind of get a little bit more of the properties of when I'm drawing with pencil and how it gets darker. But then the circle brush itself, just because it's circle, it feels a little bit awkward for me as well because it still doesn't really feel like pencil. So here's a brush that I use a lot, and I'm just going to do a quick demonstration of how this brush feels like before I kind of explain how, and I'm going to show everyone how I make it. This is a pencil brush that I use, and I can't really even draw with any other brush ever since I started using this pencil brush. So you can see that's this pencil brush. It has a default property of the multiply, so it really gives me a feeling that I feel is the closest to me drawing on pen and pencil. It has a little bit of these kind of grainy texture, and at the same time also has a property of if I just keep sketching on top, the colors gets a little bit darker. So it helps me a lot when I'm just doing sketches, when I'm just working on my initial layout. So this video I'm going to talk about how I would make this pencil brush. It's actually quite simple, and you could play around the settings to make tiny tweaks to the pen. So I'm gonna choose a marquee tool and just create a rectangular shape like so, and I'm gonna fill it with black. With this selected, I'm gonna go to edit and define brush presets, and this is how you make a brush. Basically, when you have any shape selected, you go to edit, define brush preset, and let's call this the pencil. So when you do that, you realize that in your brush list, I'm right clicking on the canvas, is the new brush that you just created. But when you first make this brush, you'll see that it looks nothing like what I just did before. So we're going to go into the settings a little bit. The first thing I'll go to set up would be the shape dynamic. I'm going to turn this on, and I'm going to set the size to pen and pressure. So basically what this does, it makes it go from small to big, small to big. And I usually set the minimum diameter a little bit bigger, but you could play around with that. I don't want my lines to go super thin from thick, and I want it to just generally remain similar size. Now the next thing I would do to give it that kind of grainy texture is I'll go into texture, and if you go to the top right here, for the Photoshop they have a lot of default settings that's in there already. So I'm going to choose a rock pattern right here. This is already loaded, but I'm going to click OK. So I'm going to select this one. You might realize that there isn't any changes to brush. It still kind of pretty much looks the same. And this is why you want to play around with depth. You want to lower it so that some of these texture kind of shows through. Let me just use this one a little bit. So for example, so you see as I lower it, this brush preview kind of showed how the grain will show up. So let me just do an example. So here we go. We have this kind of grainy texture on the brush already. Personally, I feel that this grain is a little bit too strong. I don't want something really dominant. So I could scale this texture accordingly. I could make it a lot bigger so that the texture will become a lot bigger. Or I could make it really small, maybe this small. And so the texture is hardly visible right here. You could really play around with depth and the scale to kind of see how much texture you want in the brush. And the next one I would do is the transfer right here. You could turn this on to pen pressure, so you could have a little bit of the opacity sensitive. This is kind of optional. So we are pretty much done with setting up the brush. And I'm going to set this brush to multiply. And we have a pencil brush. I have no idea why I keep drawing this strange looking guy's side view. It's kind of what I always end up drawing when I'm just doodling without thinking. With this same brush, I really like to use this rectangular brush a lot, and you might have your preference. You could try making a brush for triangle, you could square. Rectangular I find gives me the most versatile when I'm sketching. I could make a thick stroke, I could make a thin stroke depending on the direction I use. And this is probably related to how I normally sketch or how I hold my pencil, so it kind of gave me this habit. So with the same brush, what you could do is turn off the multiply and set this to flow. Oh, and if you turn off the texture too, this will kind of give that dry marker feeling. So it will give a little bit fuzzy feeling for the brush, and I just find it a little bit more interesting than the circle brush. So hopefully this was helpful for giving you a little bit of tips on how to create a brush for sketching.